Professor Andrew Mallett is an adult nephrologist with a special interest in genetic kidney disease and nephrogenetics. Having been a Churchill Fellow and an RACP Foundation Jacot Research Establishment Fellow, he has a strongly emerging clinical and research profile in this field. Currently Professor of Medicine, JCU, and Clinical Fellow, IMB at UQ, Prof Mallett is also National Director of the Kidsgen Collaborative and Director of Clinical Research and Nephrologist, Townsville University Hospital. He's committed to improving the understanding of inherited kidney disease, as well as the clinical care and outcomes of Australians affected by it. Andrew, it's great to see you again. Thank you for making time for us. How are you?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me, Anita. It's great to be able to do this together and to see each other again like this.
It is. Thank you. So let's learn a bit about you. Can you please tell us about your career to date and where your interest in nephrology stems from, and also how you've come to gain your position as the Director of Clinical Research at Townsville?
So it's been a really interesting ride, I think, is what I say to a lot of people. So I'm, as you said, I'm the Director of Clinical Research and Professor of Medicine here at Townsville now, and I'm an adult renal physician or nephrologist by training. And interestingly, I think I fell in, and I don't think it's too much to say, fell in love with that specialty area. In fact, actually as a medical student initially. And I found that it was the area and the domain of practice that I kept coming back to. So, there were other things that you would find to be interesting and experience as you were going, but this was always the area I came back to multiple times over. And then as a junior doctor by that stage, I think through the process of working out, well, what do I do with my career, really had to think quite hard about, well, this isn't just about what I want to do, it's also about what I perhaps don't want to do. And the best litmus test I said to myself was, what do I imagine life looking like perhaps when I'm 50? And through that lens went, well, I want to be a physician, first of all, and I want to be an adult physician, and then started down that pathway. And I think importantly, didn't have to have all the answers to everything as I went, and then just walked through and found that, yes, adult nephrology was the area I wanted to proceed next into, did so, and then worked out as part of that, well, I wanted to move into a space where I was doing research within that space, and so did so, and then found that I really enjoyed that and added in some additional leadership and management elements to that. And lo and behold, I've found myself here. I think most critically looking back is that it wasn't as if when I was, say, 17 finishing high school, that this was the point at this time in my life I exactly knew I wanted to be at. And in fact, if a 17-year-old said that this is exactly what they wanted to be doing at 38, that there might be a disorder for that. That might not be entirely healthy or normal. Right. But yeah, it's been a really interesting process to get here.
Yes, I'm sure it has been, and you've certainly filled so much into your years. I've seen your CV; it's a very full CV. But so what stands out to me at the moment is that, you did sort of start thinking about putting a plan in place, and, obviously that developed over time, but as you went, different opportunities arose and you took them up and pursued those.
Yes. I mean, people say that you might be lucky, in doing things, but I mean, luck is really that collision of opportunity and hard work. And so I think identifying, when to put in hard work and opportunities that come your way has been something I've certainly grasped recurrently through my career.
Right. Yes. Well, that appears to be the case when I have looked at your CV in the past. And many listeners also combine passions for clinical work and research. And today I'd like to get your insights regarding how you've managed to juggle the many competing demands that arise out of each of these interests, and what you would recommend to doctors aspiring to a career as a clinical academic.
I think in Australia it can be challenging at times because this is a pathway that we see the outcome from, but the pathway to get there isn't entirely 100% clear. And there are more supports coming in now to enable people to undertake this career pathway, but it's not as well demarcated and thus supported as it is in other places, particularly say like in North America or in the United Kingdom. Now that doesn't mean it's not a very worthwhile pathway. And I think what I say to many of my trainees and junior staff and even other consultants, to be honest as well, is to find the things research-wise, in particular within your practice, that you're passionate about. Finding those things means that you can direct your energies, even though that's often a fixed bandwidth, you can focus them in a way that generates impact, which is the currency within which research is increasingly operating, to ensure that you're creating impact in multiple domains concurrently. So, for a more junior trainee, you're doing a case report, within the practice, so a patient that you're caring for, and you're doing a case report on their particular, noteworthy presentation. And through that, you're also learning about, things like ethics and governance and consent and publications and things like this. All of those efforts will improve fundamentally the care that you're providing as well as your training, but also developing those research skill sets. So finding those ways that there's always a value add, there's a plus something to what you're doing, means that the energy that you're bringing, I think, results in, over time, much like things like, say, for instance, our superannuation, it just builds up. And summatively, I think it can build up to a career that's impactful, even if it's sometimes a little, unclear as to how you exactly got there.
Right. Yeah. Steady, consistent effort is the resounding sort of theme that I'm hearing here,
Yes.
as well as passion. And I really encourage people to be led by the things that they love doing.
Absolutely. It's
because, as you say, if you're really enjoying it, then the outcomes are going to always be the best that they possibly can be.
Yes. It's critical, I think, that whatever you choose to do, either as a career specialty or within your career specialty, is actually something that you really genuinely care about. Life is too short to be doing someone else's dream or career. You have to do what you're actually interested in. And I think that helps you to both be more, to succeed, to endure sometimes elements that can be challenging, but also fundamentally to, I think, be happy with what you have done and are doing.
Right. And no doubt there were some key people who you turned to for guidance and support during particularly challenging times. Are there any particular mentors or teams or a particular professional network that helped you through?
There are a lot, and I think that there's, I've learned this over time as well, that there are distinctions between different people who, for periods of your career, help you around specific things. And there are supervisors as one kind of category of people. There are mentors, and then there are champions, and we all need a bit of all of those, and they mean different things. I've been really fortunate to have strong mentorship, from different people throughout my career at different stages. And I think that was, phenomenal to help me progress through the clinical training pathway that I did, as well as transitioning into beginning a research pathway around, doing a research higher degree. Through that research higher degree and then beyond, different people. So the other thing is these different supervisors, mentors, and champions all bring different skills, experiences, and knowledges, which are applicable at different times in different ways for you in your career as it develops as well. So you always remain, as much as one can, on friendly terms with these people who support you, but it doesn't mean that necessarily the mentor of today is going to be a mentor forever. I don't think that's healthy or reasonable either, because that relationship has to be meaningful for both parties, and valid and fulfill a need. But I think transitioning those and seeking out mentorship is a really key thing. So I think I learned fairly early on, it can't be accidental. It has to feel seamless, so that you're seeking out those opportunities and asking for people to mentor you. And I would suggest to many that it's not a shameful thing to ask, people, oh, I'm looking for a mentor. Would you be keen to mentor me? How would they know unless you ask? People aren't waiting in the wings, I don't think, to say, hey, can I mentor you? I think alerting people and asking that question, people respond positively to.
I think most people actually take it as quite a compliment, and they're willing to share their knowledge, and they're happy to help other people develop and give them a hand up along the way. No. Especially when they know that there's going to be a flow-on effect of that as your career progresses, you'll be doing the same for others.
Absolutely. There is that paying it forward phenomena too. So in due course, the mentee becomes the mentor. And I've certainly realized that. And I think that's if you've been the recipient of very positive and strong mentorship, that really helps you in delivering mentorship as well to others. I found that incredibly rewarding, as I hope that, me being a mentee to some of my mentors, I hope that they'd found it incredibly rewarding as well.
Yeah. And look, Andrew, you mentioned age before. You're quite young for a professor. Has age ever been raised as a potential issue, or have people been generally accepting of your ability and progression to senior positions?
This is a really tricky question, which I love. I would be absolutely lying if I didn't say that this had come up. I can still remember, the most notable and early scenario was I did a Churchill Fellowship a few years ago, and I remember as part of the process of being interviewed for that, which is a fantastic, really amazing process, I was asked by someone on the panel about what made me think that I could do what I was proposing, given that I was at that time, a near final year registrar, which they were a non-medical person, they understood was fairly junior in the grand scheme of things. So it was probably the first time I experienced nakedly, any kind of form of subtle ageism. And I was pretty shocked, I'll be honest. I was really shocked. But I think just as, one confronts adversities like this, you got to come back quickly. And so I remember just kind of saying, well, it's a wonderful perspective. However, I think I was 28 or something at the time. And I said, I'm 28. I've completed 2 undergraduate degrees, a master's degree, an associate fellowship, and within 1 year of completing a fellowship, and I'm 28. Imagine with your support what I'll be able to do over the next 2 decades. There were no more questions about my age at that point. As is probably, I think, correctly the case. I think it has come up again, when I think in a general sense, when I was looking to this role, as you pointed out, I am on the young side to be appointed to be a full professor, a level E, within the university. And I'm not appointed as an adjunct. I'm a full internal professor on staff with the university. It happens and is a phenomena that occurs, but I think one has to encourage people to see what you're capable of, and age is just a number. And I love that quote that, whilst youth is no guarantee of innovation, age is also no guarantee of wisdom. And I think you can, very much regardless of your age, demonstrate capability. And just being authentic and just being very clear helps, I think, to circumvent this as a scenario. But I apologise to hear, that I'm sure there are many others who have experienced these unusual questions and all of the isms that we see, favoritism, sexism, racism, ageism. The best way I have thought to handle them is directly and to negate that they're really appropriate in the scenario.
Yeah, well, nicely handled and nicely put. And I think that that'll be, valuable advice for a lot of the junior doctors coming up, and indeed anyone who's experiencing the isms, because unfortunately they're alive and well. And you mentioned the Churchill Fellowship. Could you tell us about that experience and the way that impacted on your professional development?
Absolutely. So the Churchill Fellowship that I did was really focused around the clinical practice in the subspecialty that I'm in now, which is around inherited and genetic forms of kidney disease, which, whilst that sounds like a really small area of a reasonably modest specialty, it's actually a really big area of a specialty that affects somewhere in the region of 1 in 8 Australians. So, it's actually a much bigger area than we had appreciated. And until the time that I went and undertook that Churchill Fellowship, there was very little activity in that space here in Australia. So there was a lot of unmet need. I was coming towards the end of my advanced training, and I thought, as is often be the case, to give it a go. Why not? What's the worst that could happen? They say no. So I thankfully, the application was a fairly short, I think, 2-pager, space limited application, and placed an application and was shortlisted. And so in Queensland, only 1 in 10 expressions of interest are actually selected to proceed to interview. And then, which I didn't realise at the time, all I knew was that I got an invite to come to the interviews that were being held on a Saturday at the Supreme Court. And rocked up at the Supreme Court and found it was probably a much bigger deal than I really thought it was, and which was hilarious. And was interviewed by a panel of 20 luminaries, literally, across many sectors in Queensland, in the private chambers of one of the Supreme Court justices. And like all of the other interviewees, of which there was about 100 of us across 2 days, and then I was selected. And I guess the next signal I had that this was really something was that we were invited to Government House to be awarded by the governor. By this stage, I was starting to realise, what have I got myself into here? And it was quite an experience. And then, this was all just leading up to the actual event, which was going on, this Churchill Fellowship, for 2 months. Overseas, and I was I thought it was amazing because it's an opportunity to step out in a funded fashion, fully funded to do so by the organisation, and go to all of these places to just observe and learn and experience from people who are the absolute leaders in their area, and everybody I emailed to come and visit overseas across the United Kingdom, France, Canada, and the United States all said yes. So I went and had this 2-month adventure and came home, and from there was able to launch into both my clinical practice in that space, but also into commencing a research higher degree, a PhD. I think that experience was transformative career-wise, and also probably personally as well, because it was at a transition point for me, and really made me think about what did I want to do and how did I want to do it and where did I want to be, and how do you fit all the bits in, because life isn't just your career, life is a whole lot of other bits too, and having that space to do it was great.
Excellent. And again, that comment attests to what we were saying before about people being willing to give others a hand up and share their time and share their expertise and knowledge, because I think too those people understand the benefits of doing that, rather than those few that might be out there that'll be a bit cynical about a young up and coming brilliant young doctor. So I think it's really worthwhile for junior doctors to hear about these experiences and the opportunities that are out there for them. And if you don't throw your hat in the ring, then you don't get that sort of exposure. And I'm really interested too in terms of the experience you had in other countries, because I imagine that you formed professional networks and contacts that you're still, some of whom you'd be in touch with today. Would that be right?
Absolutely. So the key and core place that I did based myself for the majority of the time was at Addenbrooke's Hospital with the University of Cambridge, and the team there remain close colleagues and friends, I would say, in fact, to the point where over the subsequent few years, I went back again and again for anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks each year in a similar model. Because I also rapidly realized that more traditional model of moving overseas to do a 1-year fellowship wasn't compatible with my life circumstance. My spouse, my wife, was in the middle of her training, and it wouldn't be fair for us to just pick up and go and disrupt her training and life and everything as well. So we did this middle model where I went for a bit of time every year, and they were incredibly welcoming of that, and it's built great relationships. And then other centres, particularly in the United Kingdom, have maintained strong relationships, which have then, even as recently as just now, continuing to do research collaborations together. So those relationships keep paying back for both parties, many, many, many years later.
That's fantastic. Andrew, I'm aware that, your experience, you're in a leadership position now, or a number of leadership positions and roles. I'm sure that many people look to you for guidance and support. And I'm sure that listeners would also be really interested to hear about some of those that stand out to you. And I'm keen to hear in particular about the Kidsgen Collaborative and how that came into being. Would you like to share about that?
Absolutely. So,
would you like to share?
Kidsgen has been that project? Yes, absolutely. So, Kidsgen has been a major part, I think, in these most recent few years of my career, is particularly when we were moving from a model where we had a single renal genetics clinic in Queensland, which we could see was working and could be translatable. And then working with colleagues in other states and territories to see whether similar models may work there, and then also bringing in different research angles, both genomically and in wet labs and things. And all of these bits and pieces that we're developing bit by bit then were catalysed around an NHMRC grant that we received. I was still a PhD student at the time. And that really kind of was a focal point to bring together all of the centres and collaborators. And resultant from that was the formation in 2015 of the Kidsgen Collaborative, which is a collection of people and centres around the country focused on improving care, research and outcomes for Australians affected by inherited forms of kidney disease. We were then fortunate to, both because of the national footprint and overarching aims and themes, we have been supported through multiple sequential projects through funding, initially and continually now, even from Australian Genomics, then called the Australian Genomic Health Alliance, which was a national consortium supporting the implementation of clinical genomics across the country, and we undertook 2 large flagship programs there within our Kidsgen consortium, and then more recently funded from the Federal Government Department of Health in support of the National Strategic Action Plan for Kidney Health around an initiative focusing on a few things, but particularly clinician education around genetic testing for inherited forms of kidney disease, collecting information, and better understanding the needs of our patients and families. And then just in the last literally 6 or so months, we've been successful in a further, going back to our kind of, I would say, our roots, a large grant from the MRFF in the Genomic Health Future Mission over the next several years, going back to do research genomics to understand the ununderstandable for patients and families. And that all sounds, I know, very ragtag as I walk through it, being a sequential series of projects that at times are quite different. But importantly, it represents, I think, a community of people of many different kinds and makes and locations, all focused on a common set of aims and interests. And that's been fantastic to be part of leading and facilitating. And now I'm at a stage where I'm leading and seeing through this next phase, through this next MRFF grant, and I'm actually actively at a point now looking to be handing over that national directorship of the consortium as we'll get no doubt towards the end of that. And that's a really great place to be, I think, in seeing friends and colleagues also develop to be able to come next and bring their flavour and their take on what that consortium will look like. It's really exciting, and I think it's important to keep it fresh and dynamic.
Excellent. Well, that kind of answers my next question, because I wanted to ask you about sort of where priorities do you think should lie when it comes to supporting sort of budding and established researchers to ensure that those activities within medicine flourish. And what really stands out to me about your career actually is this: I love that you don't necessarily go down the well-trodden path. You're very aware of other opportunities and connections and the importance of collaborating and working with others. So, you know, I think that was really well conveyed when you were talking about your experiences overseas through the Churchill Fellowship, and then, you know, the benefits that have come on after that for so many other people. And it sounds really interesting what you're doing and handing over. And I particularly like that, because sometimes people don't like to hand over things. They like to hang on to certain positions, but there's a lot to be gained from giving some of the action to others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, you know, knowing and learning those differences in those roles between supervisor, mentor, and champion, and how it's important that we deliver in each of those at different times. And, you know, the critical difference I've learned most recently, you know, between mentors and champions, is that champions are very much like mentors, except they will throw opportunities in front of an individual as well, whether they realize they're doing that or not. But it's important to do that. You can be a sounding board for others and helping them with their self-directed career development, but being a champion where when opportunities come to provide them for others, rather than just necessarily taking them yourself, I think is really important. And I think that there's a personal sense of joy that you can very much attain from doing that. Because this is a team sport. This isn't an N of one marathon. In fact, it's about seeing ways in which you can enjoy the success of others rather than being perhaps motivated to get ahead at all costs. That's absolutely not I think a value set that I have. Whether that's been positive or negative for my career, I don't know. But because of my value set, to be honest, I probably don't care.
And I'd say it's been positive for you and for the others around you. And to me, that spirit of generosity is a really great quality. And that's, you know, sometimes we don't see that. I was speaking with someone today who was telling me kind of the opposite story, actually. And I thought that's so disappointing that he's someone who wants more opportunities, but because they're not meeting a very set list of criteria, that they're not getting those chances. And, you know, I think people need to look more beyond those sort of very strict guidelines at times where possible, and give people a chance to show what they can do. And like you say, champion and encourage them to be able to take that next step in their career development. And I'm curious also in terms of your supervision of research projects, what have you found to be some of the most rewarding experiences from the research that you've supported so many of your colleagues with?
Oh my gosh. I think thank you for asking that question, because it's an area of great professional and personal joy, and I've realised more and more that maybe the approach I've taken is a little different as well. I have tended to always ensure that those who I was supervising, I've always communicated, the projects that they're doing are theirs. I'm here to supervise and will be very involved as much or as little as they should need. But fundamental ownership of whichever project or program of work needs to rest with them as the lead researcher. That's actually important. One doesn't want to be caught up doing somebody else's PhD or program or project or whatever, because I think that even if it's wildly successful, at some level it may undermine their personal sense of the success that's come from that. So whether it's a small focus project for a researcher, a clinician researcher or non-clinician researcher even, who's at a very early stage of research development, completion of that can be just as, wonderful and celebrated as the very, very experienced researcher who's completing a PhD program. I think it's not just about what type of research it is, but it's about, for that individual, where they are at in their career development, what does that mean for them? So I'm lucky to be able to say I'm incredibly proud of all of the different research projects across multiple different fields and domains, both for trainees, clinicians, medical students, research higher degree students. All of them are amazing. And the other key thing that brings them together is that they're all damn fun. You have to be doing things, I think, that are entertaining and interesting and fun. And each of them in their own way is very much that. Sometimes they're wildly different and they don't all conform to a very neat portfolio of work which is immediately identifiable as exactly what I'm interested in. But I don't see that there is necessarily a need for that. There are sometimes projects or research higher degree programs that are very much aligned to my personal research interests, but often they're not. And that's probably, I really think that's a positive thing as well. Most recently, since I think coming to North Queensland, I've a PhD student who's I'm the primary supervisor for is actually a pharmacy graduate, and she's doing a fantastic research higher degree program around pharmacist-led education around medication prescribing, which is actually a pretty complicated space for final year medical students and first year junior doctors. And that's been a fantastic program, very much outside my comfort zone, research-wise. But I'm learning a lot, she's learning a lot, and it's really exciting. So I think it's opening yourself up to those opportunities, and I think being open to being surprised by things to keep it fresh.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And in terms of change with research and indeed across clinical practice, technology is impacting so many areas, from telehealth and diagnostic tools to data sharing platforms and other tools for collaborating more easily. Is there currently a potential game changer for nephrology and future research that you're working on?
So, nephrology is an area which is traditionally a very academic specialty area, which is great. Suits me to a T. But it is also an area which has been hunting down what are the big game-changing next technologies and approaches that will transform the outcomes and lives of our patients. Because, end-stage kidney disease or kidney failure is incredibly impactful in a negative way for Australians who are so affected. And we've tried many, many different approaches to alleviate that. I think that where once upon a time I had thought that, there has to be something which is the singular game changer. And occasionally, yes, there are a singular thing that is the game changer, one of which in our space would be when hemodialysis first became generalizable and able to be delivered to patients. That was an absolute game changer. And then when kidney transplantation became feasible, that was the next one. At the moment, I think looking into the future, there are a few different areas across different domains which are iteratively progressive. In the diagnostic space, I think particularly our genomic and advanced proteomic type technologies are going to continue to transform the level of precision we have diagnostically, both, for, say, patients like with genetic kidney disease, but also the way that we look at, say, things like kidney biopsies or blood test measurements and things like that. I think therapeutically there's been a significant refocusing at an industry level around treatments that slow progression of kidney disease of many different forms, and we're beginning to see the benefits of this come now. New agents such as the SGLT2 inhibitors, which are clearly going to make a very substantial impact in the kidney disease space. In rare kidney disease, there is a renewed focus in industry for novel compounds to slow individual rare kidney diseases that might have a very specific underpinning molecular mechanism. But then also at a broader state, we're re-engaging with patients to hear more and learn more and be more responsive to the needs that they have. And that's really important and showing a shift. And in the ways that we treat kidney failure, that really hard outcome, there are new things coming such as implantable kidney type devices, which are non-biological. And so may potentially take the place of some of our kidney replacement therapies, such as dialysis or kidney transplantation. And people may have seen just recently initial pilot studies of xenotransplantation. So which one had previously thought, and at times, if one dared joke, was always going to be tomorrow's solution to today's problem, but it would always be tomorrow's solution. There's now a pathway where it actually may become today's solution, which I think is fantastic to see, but we need to hear more over these coming few years. I'm filled with hope for the remainder of my career that we're going to see substantial progress in nephrology, and that's exciting. It will be great to be not just a participant in that, but also even just an observer, to be able to see the change that these things will make to people's lives.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure people will find that immensely interesting and helpful, Andrew. And I think about where you are in the world now, and one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you is that I'm interested in speaking to clinicians all over the country, and not people who are, just only those based in the large cities, because there's so many obviously different communities around Australia, and different those different environments impact people in different ways, and including the clinicians who are treating patients. What do you see, having been returned back to Townsville, as some of the main challenges faced by the communities of far north Queensland, and how do those impact on the roles of clinicians and even the researchers?
I think there's one of the biggest things I've noticed since returning to northern Queensland is the density is clearly very different. So previously living in Brisbane for well over a decade, within Greater Brisbane, there are multiple hospital and health services. So as an employee, as a clinician, and also as a researcher, there were multiple options potentially over time as to where one might want to work without necessarily needing to up stumps and move house and things like that. So that model where there's a lot of options potentially around you because of the density is very different in northern Queensland. So here in Townsville, there's a single large public hospital, but there's just that, a single large public hospital. So for someone like myself and my spouse who've devoted our lives to public service and being employed in the public sector, well, there is only really one potential employer, and that's a little different. There's also only really there's one large university based here in North Queensland. There are others with campuses, of course, in northern Queensland, but largely are education focused in terms of what their local footprint is, as opposed to primary research. So I think that's a major difference in terms of access and visibility. For patients, it may mean that their local health service, us as the clinicians within them have to perform perhaps a wider variety of functions. So as opposed to having our specialty function or our subspecialty function, additionally embracing a degree of generalism what we do as well is also important. And there's been a very appropriate, I think, in Australia, re-engagement with generalism as opposed to following specialisation and specialism to its zenith. And now we're at a point where, well, what does that mean for clinicians in their training, for patients expecting appropriately very good care in a variety of settings? And I've had some really interesting discussions locally with leaders within the medical school here and even within the hospital that these aren't diametrically opposite things, where just because you're an ultra specialist in one area, that doesn't mean that you're not also having other hats on, and you're also a generalist as well in other ways. Whereas before, the presumption had been, if you're, say, someone like myself, where I'm an adult renal physician, which they would already classify as being a subspecialist, and then I subspecialize even further into specifically inherited and genetic forms of kidney disease. I'm the kind of person who's supposed to only ever be in these 1,000 plus bed hospitals in the middle of capital cities. But they never anticipated, what if those people might also have other hats? And so we can actually be multiple people at the one time. And I think that this is one of a number of potential pathways forward to, I think, find a middle ground. This isn't specialism versus generalism and that they're fundamentally opposed, but what's the middle ground where they can coexist? And that's a good thing for patients, I think, because they get the benefits of both worlds without us getting too siloed down. And that's been, I think, really interesting to see and learn and hear. And also to challenge people, here who had particular ways of thinking, which, maybe it was time to hear something a bit different. Maybe it was time to see someone who's doing something a little bit different. And by virtue of being a local graduate from this medical school as well, they can't really not listen to me, which has been really fun. They can't ignore me. And they're also seeing, a large number of their local graduates return. So this experiment of regionalised medical training is actually paying dividends, maybe not in necessarily the ways that they had exactly planned and thought at the beginning, but there are benefits coming. And certainly I've observed qualitatively that a significant proportion of the new hires as consultants here in Townsville over this past year, many of them are actually local graduates who are returning. And I think that's a fantastic affirmation of the model. And it also demonstrates, I think, for many of our trainees today in other places, where you are now may not be where you're going to be forever. And things change, seasons change. Tomorrow is potentially a good time to, start afresh. And people, in places you've been before, generally speaking, will welcome you back with open arms.
Excellent. And it's such great news for the people within those communities who are benefiting from the healthcare of people who've trained in numerous places, and because they're in a smaller centre is not necessarily any disadvantage to them now. And I love that idea of, challenging the status quo. And I think there's a lot of that going on in lots of sectors, and particularly medicine as well, which perhaps followed a very particular sort of career path or program for a long time. And I think that those set borders are starting to become a bit more, they're shifting a bit, which is having very interesting outcomes for a lot of people. And so,
Absolutely.
Andrew, thank you for that. And so what's next for you in 2022?
Oh, gosh. 2022 is going to be a really, hopefully, interesting and fun year. It's a year to try and stay positive while hopefully one's swabs stay negative. Fingers crossed to seeing that through. In my role, we're at the point now where our hospital-wide research strategy, which is a multi-year strategy, is due for renewal. So I'm going to be very involved in redoing that. There are a number of initiatives within the university further strengthening the discipline of internal medicine, which I'm the head of at 38, and I keep laughing at that whenever I say it out loud, and trying to really, I think, fortify that as a viable career pathway and training pathway as well for our students locally. In my research world,
Mhm.
I'm, there's a whole bunch of cool things on the boil, I can say that. And there's the never-ending mill of applying for grants, hopefully getting a couple, doing some great research and getting some great papers out. And I have a couple of research higher degree students who, fingers crossed, will be submitting their theses this year, which will be great. I'm looking forward to getting the robes back on and going to their, hopefully, in-person graduation ceremonies in due course, which will be awesome.
Yes.
And I think clinically, I'm really looking forward to, now that I'm a bit more settled here in Townsville, going back to doing some of the things I really had forgotten that I loved, like inpatient medicine, not necessarily in overwhelming volumes, but doing some components of that, and continuing to strengthen that relationship with the renal department here that I'm obviously a part of, because, at the core of all of this is my passion for the practice of internal medicine generally, but renal medicine specifically.
Wonderful. Well, no shortage of activities planned on your schedule for the year, which comes as no surprise to me. And I wish you all the very best with all of those projects, Andrew. And thank you very much for sharing some of your story and your expertise with us today. How can listeners learn more about you or potentially get in touch?
Anytime, very open. I think places to find me. So I would advocate for many of our trainees and staff to engage with Twitter. I know that sounds a bit silly and borderline a bit millennial, but I think it's fantastic academically. You get to come into contact with people. So I'm on Twitter. I think I'm at Andrew Mallett, 2 L's and 2 T's, 8. On LinkedIn as well. People search me, they'll be able to find me. And anytime, andrew.mallett at health.qld.gov.au. Please don't hesitate to reach out. So it turns out you will laugh. Some people Googled me recently. There are a few Andrew Mallets around, one of whom apparently has written a book on Linux coding. That's not me. And Google's very confused about us. But
yes, right.
Very happy for people to reach out, ask questions, seek advice confidentially or otherwise. And I hope everybody has a really fantastic and productive year.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Andrew. That's really kind of you to extend that offer to people, and thanks again for your time.
No worries. Thanks so much, Anita.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Standout Medical Careers. If you like the episode or think it will be useful to someone else, please leave a review at podchaser.com. And if you've got any questions, let me know on LinkedIn at Standout Medical Careers. And remember, the better you articulate your story, the more you will stand out.